Hello, and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 37 years. And in that time, I've seen theories come and theories go. But you know what? We still don't have a cure, and we're still not even sure what causes multiple sclerosis. But I do find it interesting what people have been looking at over the years. And you do have to wonder if we're getting warmer, if we're getting closer to some kind of answer just by looking at all the different theories, even if they don't end up holding water. One of the things I found useful was to look at maps of the world in terms of possibilities for what might be causing multiple sclerosis. And I thought I'd share some of that with you today. Before I do, I just want you to bear in mind that because multiple sclerosis is not, as far as we know, a communicable disease, there is no requirement to report a case of multiple sclerosis to whatever government of whatever country you're in. So for the United States, it would be the public health folks, the CDC, so that they can track it at a national level. It takes a special project to identify multiple sclerosis in different countries. So that doesn't get done very often because that takes money. I think the last time it was really done to any degree was 2018. I might be wrong about that. But regardless, it doesn't really matter because I don't think the trends overall are changing greatly. But these maps, though they may be a few years old, I think they're still going to give you the general idea. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got. Well, let's get started by looking at a map of the world that purports to show how prevalent MS is in various regions of the world. And this one I liked for a couple of reasons. And it was posted about 3 years ago, according to the header up there. But what I do like about this one, it's actually got a legend, a key that can help us know what the colors mean. Believe it or not, not every map I found had that. So as you can see, there's a lot of blue and yellow kind of up in the northern part, and there's more tan down below that. And as we look at our legend, we see that prevalence, the highest prevalence is greater than 90 cases per 100,000 people. And that would basically be North America and Western Europe. And then below that is 30 to 90 cases per 100,000. That's in sort of an orangey red. And that would be much of the rest of Europe. It would be the southern United States, apparently the far north in Canada, and the southern part of Australia, and then some of the islands off of Australia as well. And then yellow, 10 to 30 cases per 100,000. That looks like much of Asia, Alaska, and the southern part of South America, and then also India, and the northern part of Australia. Then finally the tan is most of Africa, and then much of China, and then the northern part of South America, Central America. You get an idea from this map that a definite pattern is emerging here. Okay, we now know where MS tends to congregate. There tends to be more of it. But do we know the why? That's the big question. And a lot of theories, as I've said, have been proposed over the years. But do any of them really explain to everyone's satisfaction what is causing multiple sclerosis? So we've looked at geography. Now let's look at a few things in terms of geography. And one of the early theories was proposed by Dr. Swank, Dr. Roy Laver Swank, and I've talked about him before. His main focus in treating multiple sclerosis was to reduce or even eliminate saturated fat in the diet, because he really felt that was causing multiple sclerosis, or certainly letting it get worse. He referred to the two types of diets in the world as the beer butter cultures, like North America and Western Europe and Australia, and the wine oil culture, so wine and olive oil, essentially. So that would be some parts of Europe and much of the rest of the world. Now, I don't know, if you look at this map, you might wonder about that. And here I'm going to take you, for just a minute, I'm going to take you to a map of the United States, because I think it makes the point a little better. So here we have a map of the United States. Again, it's not incredibly current, but it really doesn't matter for the point I'm trying to make here. As you can see, the more orangey, the darker the color, the more MS there is per 100,000 people. We've got some northern states that seem particularly prone to multiple sclerosis. So Washington, Minnesota, Vermont. According to Dr. Swank's theory, that would mean that these northern climates are more the beer butter type cultures, where the cooking centers around butter and the beverage of choice is beer. And those are both pretty bad for you in terms of saturated fat. And then he would say that wine oil is going to be characteristic of fewer cases of multiple sclerosis, and I am not making a slam here at anybody in the way they eat, but when you think of the South, do you think of high in saturated fat or low in saturated fat? Well, judging from other statistics that I have seen in terms of obesity and other problems related to diet and nutrition, I do not think that the American South would be considered a wine oil culture where they tend to shy away from saturated fat. So that doesn't really seem to make the point for the diet. Another prevailing theory has been that certain nutrients are helpful in MS, or maybe more specifically, the lack of certain nutrients is perhaps even causative of MS, but certainly allows MS to get a foothold. And lately, we're hearing an awful lot about the nutrient vitamin D. Those who do not get enough vitamin D are more prone to having MS symptoms. So if we look at the map again, one of the things that we can surmise is that the further you are from the equator, the less vitamin D you're going to get through natural sun exposure, partly because the days are shorter for much of the year. Part of that is because in a colder climate, you don't tend to go around, even when you are outside, you don't tend to go around with much of your skin exposed, so that you don't even get vitamin D from the sun on a sunny day. And of course, what they say is if you're above the 45th parallel, your angle to the sun is not such that you're going to be very efficient at processing vitamin D out of the sun anyway. Whereas, as we see the equator line there running through Africa and South America, we see that MS tends to be less prevalent as you get closer to the equator. But is that perfect? No, not really, because look at Australia. They're pretty darn close to the equator, but they're pretty high in the prevalence of MS, which goes a little bit more in line with Dr. Swank's theory of diet, where if you have a diet that's high in saturated fat, you're more likely to have MS than if your diet does not include much saturated fat. Neither of these two theories seems to hold 100%, at least judging from the map. One thing that we could be looking at is genetics. There's a lot of controversy about whether MS has a genetic component or not. And let me just pull up a site here so that you can see that. When I first was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in my 20s, one of the questions I asked the doctor was whether it would be possible or whether it would be likely that I would transmit multiple sclerosis to any children that I might have, because at that time I didn't have any. And he was adamant that no, MS is not hereditary, it can't be passed down, don't even worry about it. Well, as it turned out, I didn't end up having any children. Guess I was a little bit skeptical even then that it wasn't possible to pass it down. I thought, you don't even know what causes it. How can you be so dogmatic about that? And I think I was probably right, because as the health line graph shows, there are risk factors for getting multiple sclerosis that are tied to genetics. As it says there, ratio of women with multiple sclerosis to men may be as high as 3 or 4 to 1, and I think there's got to be a genetic component to that. Women and men have different chromosomes, right? The X and the Y, and I don't know why. I have no idea why. Nobody seems to know the answer, but women are more susceptible to MS than men. And then over there in the pie charts, 15% of people with multiple sclerosis actually have one or more family members or relatives who also have MS. Now, if MS is not a communicable disease, if you can't catch MS from somebody, then clearly it must be genetic, right? So I don't know how you can say that there isn't a strong hereditary factor in MS. As you see in the chart below, identical twins have a 1 in 3 chance to also have the disease. Why is it not stronger? Well, I think one thing that has continued to be believed ever since I was diagnosed with MS, and probably even before that, is that multiple sclerosis is really kind of a two-part thing. There's a genetic component, but it requires an environmental trigger. And there have been many debates about that. What's the environmental trigger that brings it to life, essentially? I mean, it can lay dormant in your system until it's triggered by something. And maybe it's triggered even in identical twins. One may be exposed to whatever that trigger is, and the other one is not. We just don't know. Well, here's an article from Verywell Health. Is multiple sclerosis hereditary? It says other factors besides your DNA are at play, and we certainly would agree with that. But you notice the first sentence is, MS is not a directly inherited disease. So it's not definitely passed down through generations of a family. For example, you will not automatically develop multiple sclerosis because your mom, dad, or sibling has it. And then they go on to clarify that. That said, there is an inherited component to multiple sclerosis. Some people are more likely to develop MS than others based on their genetic makeup. And beyond that, I don't think they can really be definitive. And then they have some interesting statistics here. Consider the following, that in the general population, a person has a 0.1% to a 0.2% chance of developing multiple sclerosis. So essentially 1 in 500 to 750 people will get MS in their lifetime. And I don't know if they're talking worldwide or if they're talking in different regions or whatever, because as you saw from the maps I had up before, those statistics don't hold true in every place. There seems to be a greater risk in some places than others. And the second bullet there says that a person's risk increases to 2% to 4% if they have a sibling with MS. So there you go. There's a genetic component in there somewhere. Children of people with MS have an even higher risk of developing MS at 3 to 5%. So I don't know. That sounds like a pretty small thing, but it would really concern me. And then the fourth bullet, the higher risk of developing multiple sclerosis comes with being an identical twin of a person with multiple sclerosis. So in these cases, the risk is around 30%. And I thought it was noteworthy, as they say down here under genetic studies in MS, this paragraph, in a large study of over 47,000 people with MS, researchers identified over 230 gene variants associated with an increased chance of developing multiple sclerosis. So out of 230 gene variants, we don't really know that any one of them is the gene that causes MS. but it may explain why MS looks different depending on who has it, right? Every individual who has MS has a different course. There's no textbook course of MS, really. Everyone is different. They're quite unique. And I thought this was also useful to know that as far as B cells are concerned, the same study found an excess of these MS-related genetic variants in B cells. This finding implicates B cells as perhaps being involved in the earliest stages of MS development. And as you know, many of the therapies that have been promoted over the years specifically target B cells. And this may give us a little bit of insight as to why the B cells are the bad actors in multiple sclerosis. Well, I'd like to close this whole investigation by considering the mobility of people in our world today. I was thinking about this because in my life, even though I live in the state of Washington now, which as you see is one of the 3 states that has the highest prevalence of multiple sclerosis, I was born and I grew up in the state of New York until I was 21. That's where I lived. And MS doesn't have anywhere near the prevalence as it does in Washington, even though it's got its share, as you can see. A theory that I remember hearing about when I was first diagnosed was a theory that involved childhood exposure to whatever that environmental trigger is. Remember, I talked about how there's a genetic component, but there's also got to be an environmental trigger. And the theory back then, at least, and for all I know it might be still in some circles, is that you had to have been exposed to the environmental trigger by the time you were 12 to 14 years old, so somewhere around puberty. And they had all kinds of ideas of what that trigger might have been. It might have been canine distemper. It might have been the polio virus. Who knew? There were many different theories. Well, I was in New York when I hit puberty, 12 to 14. I was very much in the state of New York. So I guess all that by way of saying, what if I grew up in the state of Minnesota, where there's a lot of MS, but I decided, I'm tired of all this snow. I'm going to go and I'm going to move to Georgia. Well, look at how few cases there are in Georgia, relatively speaking. But I now have skewed the data, right? Because aren't I a native Minnesotan? And didn't I probably get the environmental trigger thing happening to me when I was in Minnesota? Now I'm in Georgia, so I've kind of skewed the data because I brought an MS case down to Georgia with me. I think perhaps the reason why there aren't as many people with MS down there is because it's hot and humid, and that is not a climate that people with MS tend to like. But I don't know, because I'm sure there are people who have lived their entire lives in the South, and they have MS, and somehow they deal with it. I have friends who live in upstate New York, and it's hot and humid there as far as I'm concerned. They get by. They don't like the hot, humid climate, but they get by. They manage. They're not moving anywhere. But my point really is that we don't know, just because these states are color-coded, it's a snapshot in time, and we don't know whether these residents are natives and have always lived here or they've moved around. And that would be true of the whole world, not just the United States. I just use this as an example because I'm familiar with it. But think about the European countries. People move around among those countries regularly, and people move around the world. So who knows? The numbers might be artificially skewed for all we know. So what have we learned, really, from looking at all those maps and thinking about the different factors that might be at play, whether it be diet, whether it be certain nutrients, whether there's a genetic component, whether it has to do with distance from the equator or average temperatures? Well, like so much with multiple sclerosis, we don't know. And then in considering the maps, there's a way of looking at something as prescriptive or descriptive. Do the maps simply describe the caseload at the prevalence of multiple sclerosis according to where you live? Or do they actually prescribe that you could reduce your chances, for example, of getting MS if you move from a state where there's a lot of MS, like Minnesota or Vermont, and you can move to Mississippi, or you can move to a foreign country entirely. You can move to some places in South America. You can move to a state or a country where there's a lot less of it, according to the map. Is that going to do any good? Well, who knows? So this hopefully was kind of fun and different to look at, but I'd love to know whether any of this makes sense to you, or if you've seen other maps that you thought were useful. Please let me know in the comments. I would really love to hear from you. Well, that's all I have for you today. But thank you for watching, and take care, and I'll see you again in my next video.